12th Bio-Zoology Chapter 6 Evolution. In this part we are going to learn adaptive radiation. Before we learn the adaptive radiation in detail, let us see the outline of what is adaptive radiation. A single common ancestor gives rise to many closely related species. This is adaptive radiation. Many closely related species evolve from a common ancestor. Closely related groups evolve in short period of time. Adaptive. This word is related to adaptation. Fishes have adaptation to live in water. Camel has adaptation to live in desert. Animals have adaptation. These adaptations help the animals to live better in the surrounding. When the surrounding is changing, the organisms develop new adaptations. These adaptations are selected by nature. That results in evolution. Now come to the word radiation. When heat is spreading, the spreading starts from one central point. When radiation is spreading, the starting point is at the center. From the center, radiation spread in all the direction. When electromagnetic radiation from sunlight spreads, it starts from the center sun and spreads to all the direction. Now let us see adaptive radiation. In what sense we use the word adaptive radiation in evolution? Here there is central common ancestor. From this common ancestor, this is at the center, many related species evolve. This is called as adaptive radiation. The common ancestor has some characters. The newly evolved species are different from common ancestor in some of the aspects. Here the common ancestor is seed eating, but the newly evolved species have different food habits. They have different types of mouth parts. This common ancestor is finches. These finches are commonly called as Darwin finches. When Darwin, the ancestor was nut eating and ground living, they were in Galapagos Island. They lived 2 million years ago in Galapagos Island. When Darwin visited the island, he found 14 different kinds of finches species. They differ in their length, size, and their song, that is the sound production. The major difference is in their beak. The differences in the beak enable the birds to use different food sources. Changes in the size and form of the beak have enabled different species to utilize different food resources. Why they have to utilize different food resources? We may have that question. The birds came to the island 2 million years ago. In the beginning, they were very few. There was no shortage of food. There was no competition. There was no predation. So they produced more number of young ones. The population size increased. In a particular point of time, there was shortage of food. In the beginning, all were seed-eating birds. Already they have variation in the mouth parts. Normally in any species, there are different varieties, different breeds. If we take dog, the same dog species has many breeds. The breeds vary in their tail, height, ear, etc. In the case of Indian cow, Bos indicus, there are a lot of breeds like Sindhi, Congayam, Ambulacheri. They differ in their color, weight, size, shape of the head, shape of the horns. In the same way, the finches also had variation in the mouth parts. When there is shortage of food, this variation helped the birds to follow different food resources. Instead of depending on the seeds, they started using worms, fruits, different kinds of food sources. That resulted in divergent evolution after a certain period of time. Finches had different food habits. Some were seed eating. Cactus ground finch, it eats fruits and flowers. And vegetarian finch, it eats buds. Woodpecker finch, it is able to eat insects because of its particular shape of the beak. All evolved from a common ancestor. So they adapted themselves to different food habits, and they were separated from each other. The food habits separated from each other. So in course of time they evolved as separate species. This is divergent evolution. This mechanism is called as adaptive radiation. Here a variation is due to gene mutation or recombination. Recent researchers found ALX1 gene is responsible for the shape of the bones in the top of the skull, front part of the skull, and beak development. So this gene controlled the shape of different beaks. Change in the nature of the gene resulted in the evolution of different beaks, but the shortage of food resulted in the diversification of different species, strictly following different food habits. This kind of adaptive radiations are seen in marsupials in Australia and placental mammals in North America. Marsupials evolved their own species. In North America, the placental mammals also evolved into different species. This is an example of adaptive radiation. They were separated from the common ancestor more than 100 million years ago. Marsupial in Australia and placental mammals in North America were separated 100 million years ago. We know what are mammals. Mammals give birth to young ones, but marsupials give birth to immature young ones. The immature young one is carried by the pouch. Whereas in placental mammals, the placenta provides nutrients. Full development takes place inside the mother's body. In Australia, they evolved further. After the Australian marsupials and placental mammals in North America separated 100 million years ago. After separation, they evolved further in Australia, and placental mammals evolved further in North America. In Australia, they evolved into more than 200 species of marsupials. Marsupials carry immature young ones in the pouch. The food resource separated and caused diversification. They follow different food resources and locomotor skill. Some moved faster, some were able to cover long distance, and some adjust different kinds of climates. These factors involve in the diversification and evolution of these two groups of mammals. Two groups involve in adaptive radiation. The marsupial in Australia have undergone adaptive radiation to occupy different diverse habits. This is one adaptive radiation. Placental mammals in Australia also exhibit adaptive radiation in evolving into variety of such placental mammals. Placental mammals further evolve into some other species of placental mammals. This is second adaptive radiation. So this diagram shows the adaptive radiation of placental mammals. A common ancestor is at the center, and there was diversification. The species radiate from the common ancestor. This is adaptive radiation in marsupials. Similar type of adaptive radiation is seen in placental mammals of Australia. From a common ancestor, they evolved further. This is second adaptive radiation. Now let us see both together. This is marsupial adaptive radiation. This is one divergent evolution. This is placental mammals adaptive radiation, another divergent evolution. Why we say divergent evolution? From common ancestor, they diversified. They radiate. In between two, there are similarities. There are functional similarities. Both are different groups, but in between the two groups there are functional similarities. In marsupial mammals there is rat. Placental mammal also there is rat. Both the rats are different, but they have functional similarities. Both are burrowing. So in between two groups there is convergent evolution. This is one divergent evolution, this is another divergent evolution, but in between the two groups, they were different groups. There were functional similarities. So this shows convergent evolution. Both evolve separately. When more than one adaptive radiation occurs, in an isolated geographical area having the functional similarities referred as convergent evolution. In between the two groups there were functional similarities. This is convergent evolution. Let us compare again placental mammals and marsupial mammals. Why do we say convergent evolution? Here placental mammals there is a mole, marsupial also mole. Their development is different, but they have same food habit. Here also anteater, placental mammal anteater, marsupial also anteater. Structure is generally different, tail is different, leg is different, ear is different. But what kind of similarities? Both are eating ant. So this shows a convergent evolution, functional similarities. And mouse, both are burrowing. And marsupial mouse and placental mouse, both are burrowing. Lemur and spotted cascus, flying squirrel, flying phalanger. This is placental, this is marsupial. They show functional similarity. What similarity? Flying. And wolf in placental mammal, marsupial mammal, Tasmanian wolf. So both show the convergent evolution, functional similarities, same food habit. Both are carnivorous. So in this part we discussed about adaptive radiation with the examples Darwin finches, marsupials in Australia, and placental mammals.